Hi, I'm Muhammad Hamdan, your host for Money Matters this week, where we're going to talk about COVID-19 economic recovery with a world-renowned economist. See you in a bit. Good evening and welcome to Money Matters. Joining us virtually on this episode of Money Matters is world-renowned economist Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much.
Great. The U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris made an official visit to Southeast Asia early this week, particularly to Vietnam and Singapore, amid rising tensions between the U.S. and China. Is this part of Washington, D.C.'s game plan to keep China's ambitions in the region in check?
Well, it is part of the U.S. game plan to create a divide with China. I think it's a very mistaken game plan. I think the U.S. should be reaching out to China for cooperation on many pressing issues, starting with COVID-19, including the world economy, the crisis in Afghanistan, the climate crisis. This is not a time for confrontation, but the U.S. is on a confrontation course with China, and it's trying to divide the world to say, for instance, in Vietnam, you are a strategic partner. That means being against China. Well, it's a ridiculous position to put a country like Vietnam or any country in Southeast Asia in, because China's a neighbor. We don't need a Cold War. We need some cooperation, in my opinion. But yes, the answer to your question is it's part of the U.S. game plan. Hardly credible during this week of withdrawal from Afghanistan, but still part of a game plan.
But why Vietnam and Singapore in particular, if I may ask?
Well, I'm not sure that there is absolute clarity in the strategy, nor do I think the strategy is necessarily a very successful one. But I think these are, trying to play on fears about China, trying to claim that China is the aggressor and so forth. But the big mistake is that two giants, that is China and the United States, should be speaking with each other, discussing with each other, negotiating with each other, not trying to pull smaller countries to one side or the other side, because believe me, being in between these two giants is not, well, but it's not pleasant, and countries should not be pressed to make such an outlandish choice.
Right. But do you see a shift in the tone of U.S. engagement with Southeast Asia in light of China's dominance in the region?
Certainly. I think what's happened in U.S. foreign policy since 2015 is to turn increasingly to an anti-China mode of operation and to try to find partners in that view. So Southeast Asia is obviously high on the U.S. agenda as a potential part of an anti-China group of nations. It doesn't make sense, in my view, since Southeast Asia has China as the lead trade partner, as the neighbor, as interconnected in countless ways. But I think it is definitely part of the U.S. planning. The U.S. planning also is to reinforce strategic allies, Australia, Japan, Korea, to also sharpen this divide and to really address India as a major counterweight. But why are we playing these balance of power games in the 21st century that were already proved to be dangerous and outmoded in the 19th century and extraordinarily destructive in the 20th century? To me, it's a throwback to old thinking about foreign policy, not at all reflective of the fact that We are so interconnected right now. We are so filled with problems. And I can tell you, the United States is so incompetent in so many ways. The last thing in the world we need is another crisis.
Well, previously, there was a lack of interest from the Trump administration in its engagement with Southeast Asian economies. But will the Biden administration engage in the mega Asia-Pacific trade deal and the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, RCEP, which the U.S. aborted under the Trump administration?
Well, the U.S. pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership at the time, but the idea of that was very flawed because the whole idea of TPP at the time was, let's make a deal in which China is not a member. Can you imagine having a Trans-Pacific Partnership in which China, the largest economy in the region, is not part? Well, that was more geopolitics than economic sense, than infrastructure sense, than climate change sense, than trade sense. It was a kind of a game. I thought it was a bad game when Obama was proposing it. Trump pulled out, sending obviously weird signals. The RCEP is something different. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, of course, is China with Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand. So it's 15 countries, which does make sense because China's a core part of it, together with ASEAN, together with Japan, Korea, and Oceania. That's a good kind of arrangement because if RCEP, the 15 countries, work together, you can remake the energy system, you can address the climate crisis, you can build infrastructure. But that's not an anti-China strategy. That is an integration strategy, which is what's really needed.
Right. Now, Professor, you mentioned climate change. Since action on climate change is front and center in President Biden's administration and Biden's goal to basically make his country's economic recovery green, how would that impact trade between the U.S. and the region, particularly Malaysia?
Well, I think it's not only Biden's strategy, but it had better be the world's strategy. You know, all of the signs that we see with our own eyes is that we are in such deep trouble right now. Heat waves, droughts, mega typhoons and hurricanes, flooding, forest fires, that we had better open our eyes to reality that we've already warmed the planet 1.2 degrees C. The warming is accelerating. The recent IPCC report, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Working Group 1 report last month, said, my God, we are hitting tipping points and we are in accelerating danger. So President Biden, of course, is on the right track of saying we need to decarbonize. Remember, he followed our crazy president and dangerous President Trump, who was on the other side of things. So Biden is on the right side. But the key is all regions need to be part of this. Where is the ASEAN plan to get to zero? This is crucial because ASEAN needs to have a strategy for its own good. Europe has the European Green Deal. Korea has the Korean Green Deal. Prime Minister Suga has committed to decarbonize by 2050. President Xi has committed to decarbonize China no later than 2060. ASEAN needs, I think, to have a very bold program that goes in the same direction.
Sure.
And I'm very excited by the fact that Indonesia will host the G20 in 2022. So this is a great opportunity for ASEAN.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to take a short break now. Sustainable Development Goals Guide to COVID-19 Recovery. That's what we're going to talk about when we return after this breather. Welcome back, and you're still with us on Money Matters as we speak with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. On Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, we are aware that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated many imbalances in 2020 and 2021, reversed socio-economic gains and delayed progress towards 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. With just 9 years to go, can SDG help absorb COVID-19 shocks, steer recovery plans and build resilience for future crises? Professor.
The SDGs are what we really need. When they were adopted, they were called the future we want. More prosperity, more social justice, and environmental sustainability. We adopted the SDGs not because it was a nice thing to do in 2015, but because we need such an approach. We were not on track to achieve them even before COVID. COVID was really a hard hit to the SDGs. And the developing countries have been especially hard hit because the rich countries, they could borrow massive amounts. The United States has spent about $7 trillion so far simply in fighting COVID. And now President Biden has on the table another $4 trillion of investment spending. But we need that kind of investment in the rest of the world as well. And that should be the top of the global agenda. That's what I'm suggesting for Bali summit of the G20 in 2022, that the front and center issue is financing for sustainable development, to put the SDGs back on track.
Right. Last month, amid the record numbers of COVID-19 cases, Malaysia presented its progress on SDG to the United Nations. The country ranked 65th out of 165 countries, though a drop from the 60th spot it got last year. In your opinion, what would be the key policies and measures that the newly appointed Malaysian government should introduce to drive the country to stimulate economic recovery while supporting sustainable development?
I would say first to have a clear strategy for 2030 and to have a clear strategy for 2050. Malaysia's had a difficult time not only with the pandemic, but with politics in recent years. So governments have come and they've gone, and there's been a lot of instability. Malaysia needs a clear path right now for its industrial development, its technology, becoming a high-tech digital society, which has been a goal for a long time. It really needs to be put in place. Malaysia needs to be a champion of the future green economy, not only in Malaysia, not only across ASEAN, but producing manufacturing goods, machinery, clean energy, using technologies that can become part of an export base for the world. So strategy is key, because it's not one short-term measure or another. It is how to put the green and digital economy front and center. Take a look at the European Green Deal. Take a look at the Korean Green Deal, which is a very good document, by the way, which is green and digital-based investments. I'd like to see a 2030 investment strategy by Malaysia. I'd like to see a 2050 vision of reaching net zero. And I would like really to see strong cooperation within the ASEAN countries, because this is a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous need.
That's very refreshing to hear. COVID-19 and the ensuing containment measures have globally pushed millions into poverty and diminished shared prosperity. While Malaysia has made tremendous strides in eradicating poverty, incidence of absolute poverty increased to 8.4% due to the pandemic. What can Malaysia do to confront poverty caused by COVID-19?
Well, obviously, the first point is control COVID-19. And Malaysia was doing a good job up until recently. And then Delta has gotten completely, explosively out of control. We should learn from China, which had a Delta epidemic. And then China went to work decisively, said, no, we're not going to allow this to spread across the country. And it battled Delta down to near zero, which is not easy to do. But China's not the only one taking that very strong fight. New Zealand is taking that strong fight. Taiwan is taking that strong fight. Hong Kong is taking that strong fight. Malaysia was in a good situation, but now it's got a very, very high transmission rate. And partly the politics of recent months has meant government has not been able to be decisive. But a new government should be very clear. We need to bring this under control because it's very hard to fight poverty in the midst of a raging pandemic.
Right. Now, we're going to go for another short break, but when we return, we will talk about private sector role in sustainable development goals. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining us as we discuss further on private sector's role in sustainable development goals. In Malaysia, Professor, you chair the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University. What are your key observations on the private sector's involvement in advancing the sustainable development agenda, both in Malaysia and the region?
It is an opportunity also for universities to work together with businesses to help the businesses ensure their alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. This is really the first thing every business should do. What are these Sustainable Development Goals? Am I aligned with them or am I running in the wrong direction? Are my production systems environmentally sustainable? Am I part of a supply chain that is not working properly or it is working properly? So we need corporate alignment. That starts with awareness. It starts with asking key questions about the product line of the company, the production processes, the supply chains, and the corporate citizenship, we call it, of the company. Is the company a good behavior? Does it follow the law? Is it paying its taxes? Is it respecting the communities where it works? Is it paying attention to sustainable development? There are many leading companies that are doing an excellent job of that. If you think about Sunway City itself, it is a sustainable project because it started from an abandoned mining site and became a great destination for healthcare, for higher education, for tourism, for retail. That is the kind of sustainable development that's very practical at a business level. Now, Malaysia has many sectors in agroforestry and palm oil and in energy, where this issue of being sustainable is of paramount significance. So I think that this is a tremendous opportunity and topic for Malaysian companies. But as you noted, this is happening around the world. So already Europe is saying, we're not going to import, or we're going to put duties on extra tariffs on a production that is unsustainable coming from abroad. It's going to become a very, very practical business issue for all businesses to make sure that they are aligned both with the SDGs and with the Paris Climate Agreement.
Right. Professor, could you also share some of the positive changes among Malaysian corporations in embracing SDG, and what sets Malaysia apart from its regional peers?
Well, I have seen over the years a tremendous number of companies come forward and say, we want to be part of the solution, whether it's in the food sector, in the commercial sector, in the retail sector, in higher education, as Sunway University, with energy companies that are moving into renewables and finding ways for Malaysia to move from the traditional fossil fuel base to renewable industry. And because other countries in the region, Korea, Japan, China, are doing this, and Malaysia is such an important part of the supply chains throughout Asia, I think that this is the real business opportunity for Malaysia. And I'm seeing a lot of interest in it because each conference, each meeting has expanded reach. The central bank, the finance officials are looking at finance standards, looking at regulatory approaches also to make sure that this transition takes place.
Right. But hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, have folded. Many are operating on a reduced capacity and downscaled to focus on domestic demand. How do you foresee SMEs, which are grappling to stay afloat, strike a balance to reset its path towards building a sustainable business?
Look, we need to end COVID-19. We need to get the Belt and Road Initiative really working and generating new infrastructure, new projects, new business for all those SMEs. That's why we need cooperation with China, cooperation with the US and Europe. We need business. Stop the epidemic, go back to business. But the business should be for a green and digital future, not the business as usual, not the backward-looking approaches. That requires a strategy, that requires regional integration, that requires success in ending the COVID pandemic. But that's our agenda, after all.
Right. Now, just before we end the show, if you can share 3 areas that the newly appointed Malaysian government can focus or should focus on in terms of supporting the economic recovery, the country's economic recovery against the backdrop of COVID-19?
Well, first of all, certainly the new government should work decisively to end this Delta surge. It's feasible. Work with experts in China, in other countries that have brought this or kept this under control during the Delta phase so that Malaysia gets this huge, huge surge back down decisively. That's number one. Second is Malaysia needs this SDG strategy to 2030. I can tell you at Sunway, we're eager to work with the government in any way to help support that. And third, Malaysia should work together with ASEAN, especially with Indonesia, for the G20 process that will take place and culminate in the G20 Bali summit in 2022, because Bali could be the time to make the great breakthroughs in financing and in global systems change to really support Malaysia and all the countries of ASEAN to get on that dynamic path of high tech, of digital, and of green. So regional cooperation, I would put as the third item on the agenda.
What about attracting foreign investments? Because Malaysia saw its FDIs drop to its lowest level since 2009 last year. So what can the new government do to attract more foreign direct investments in Malaysia?
Clearly, foreign investments come in when there's a clear strategy and a clear direction of scaled up business opportunities. So if Malaysia is part of an ASEAN-wide energy transformation, part of an ASEAN-wide digital transformation, part of the Belt and Road Initiative and similar major infrastructure building, the foreign investment's going to pour in because it's going to be very clear what the direction is and why it's profitable to be based in Malaysia, which is a wonderful country with a wonderful labor force that, when directed towards these long-term activities, becomes a great home for production.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs, it's been a pleasure to talk to you on the show.
Great to be with you. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Now that wraps up this episode of Money Matters. Do join us again next week, same day and same time, for more money insights that matter. Until then, I'm Muhammad Al-Mahamdan. Thank you for watching and stay safe.